Today we're going to talk about employee turnover. How do we get this how do we manage that? Because as John said, I know in looking at the independent grocer survey that they provide, that's a huge issue for a lot of grocers, and not just grocers. It's all companies out there right now. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the cost of employee turnover. We'll look at some opportunities to reduce that turnover. We'll talk about hiring the right employees, employee engagement, and then one thing that's gaining a lot of traction right now as a benefit specifically for part-time employees is telehealth services. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well as maybe a way to reduce this turnover. What I wanted to do is let's talk about why does it matter? So why do we care about employee turnover? Well, one of the things is obviously it costs a lot of money. In looking at the independent grocer survey, if you look at full-time and part-time turnover, in 2015, your full-time turnover was 16.2%, and in 16 it went up to 17.1, which is about a 6% increase. Your part-time employees over that same time increased about a 16%. So that part-time keeps going, part-time turnover and all turnover keeps going up. And I actually looked back at 2014 to see what it was there, to see if that increase over from 2015 to 2016 was a trend or if maybe it was just an anomaly. And the turnover for part-time employees in 2014 was 38.5%. So from 2014 to 2016, it's gone from 38.5% to 48.9%. So as you can see, it's just continuing to grow. And from a cost perspective, that gets really expensive. But one thing that we know is employee turnover is typically not tracked on financial statements. There's not a line item that says employee turnover. And so trying to determine what that really cost is a lot of times very tricky. But the University of Dallas perform some research around, and it's the grocery industry, around how much does it cost to actually replace an employee. And they did it by hours. So every hour, everybody that makes a certain dollar wage per hour, they determine that. And if you look at, let's say, an $8 per hour employee, the cost to replace that person is about $4,200. Now, what they include in that is they include opportunity costs. So it could be basically instead of someone spending all their time trying to hire employees, they're out doing something else that provides value to the business. Direct cost, which is, as it says, it's just the cost of those individuals that are trying to hire, train, and the cost of training for those employees, as well as lost customers. Because now what happens is instead of having a seasoned employee that's helping those customers, you may have somebody that they're inexperienced, they may not be able to answer all the questions, customers get frustrated, and then at that point you could lose that customer. And so with that, for an $8 per hour employee, the cost is about $4,200. From looking at the survey, a typical store has about 30 part-time employees. And with the 48.9% turnover, you're looking at about 14 hires per year. And that equates to about $58,000 in turnover costs that you're paying because of that high employee turnover, which is obviously a very significant number. What we also know is if we look at our profit leaders, and our profit leaders are defined as those that are in the top 25% of net profit. Those companies have lower employee turnover, which makes sense, right? Because we have more stability. We're using resources not on hiring employees, we're using those resources more to add value to our store. But on average, you're looking at about an 11% lower part-time employee turnover for those profit leaders versus everybody else. And you're looking at about a 12% decrease in full-time employee turnover versus everybody else. So when you look at your store and you look at what you're doing, kind of see where you are in there. Because what's been found is lower the turnover, and typically that's where your profit leaders are. So what do we do about it? So how do we reduce that employee turnover? And it's simple to say, it's easier to do. We hire good people, we make them feel wanted, and we provide them competitive benefits. That's how we get good, that's how we keep our employees. Obviously, that's much easier said than done. We have variable labor pools. Everybody has different labor pools they can pull from. And so, but what we want to talk about today is maybe how we accomplish that, or at least make those things better. In some different ways that we've kind of outlined is one, hiring the right employees. Two, employee engagement. We want them to feel wanted. And then three, access to these telehealth services, which I think can particularly help with your part-time employees. So the first thing that we want to do when we're trying to hire good people is we have to describe what do we want them to do? What is their job description? And so with that, some different ways to do that is we want to make sure that we have good job descriptions. What those will do obviously is outline the duties for that position. We want to talk about interview questionnaires because this can really help, especially inexperienced managers, to make sure that they ask questions that pertain to the job and the position. We want to talk about supervisor training and interviewing because we want to make sure that our supervisors know how to interview and how to select candidates. And we also want to look at employee screenings because it's really important that we know who we're hiring. And I know when we talk about hiring good people, it happens a lot. A lot of times we hire bodies, right? We have something, and anybody that says they haven't done that, I don't know if they're being truthful. Because there's an urgent need to fill a position. Maybe it's very busy and you just don't have time to do a proper search, and we end up just hiring a body. Again, we've all done that. Generally, from experience, that generally leads to a short-term fix. It's not a long-term fix. And so what ends up happening is we end up having to hire somebody again in the next 6 or 8 months. So we've all had bad hires. What we want to do is just maybe see how we can reduce the number of those bad hires. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about job descriptions. And there's a lot of misconceptions with job descriptions. You know, we see this is one of those things that we see a lot of companies that they just don't do. And a lot of times they don't. I was talking to a company the other day, and we were just helping them trying to determine where they are from an HR compliance standpoint, and they didn't have job descriptions. And we asked them why, and they didn't want them because they felt that if they had a job description, it would preclude them from asking their employees to do additional duties that were not on the job description. And we hear that a lot. And so, you know, I want to kind of get past that. I always like to address that in the beginning because what you would always do, we are going to list skills, abilities, duties, and those things. But we always do also have a caveat that says, or any other needed tasks, to make sure that, you know, if you're in management, you know, I've obviously owned a company. I've been in management for years. My job duty is not taking out the trash, but I sure have done it. And so that's one thing that we want to make sure that we do with these job descriptions is that these are your primary duties, but there may be other tasks that they have to perform as well. So the thing about a job description is it's going to outline the different components of that job, and it really allows us, one of the big things that it does is it allows us to, one, think through the duties of that position, which allows us then to really start defining what that perfect candidate is. And so we want to look at, with this position, what skills and abilities do we need? If they're going to be in the meat department, maybe they need to have, you know, they need to have those abilities, those meat cutting skills, interpersonal skills. What areas or specialty or expertise do they need? What competencies? And when I say competencies, are they hardworking? Are they punctual? Those kind of things. So if we put that into a position, so from a cashier, we were to look at a cashier, They're going to have to obviously be familiar with whatever system, whatever cashier system that's being run. Do they have interpersonal skills? I know that's one of the things that I hate is when I go to the grocery store and my cashier won't look at me or speak to me. They have to be courteous. I know one of the things I was talking to a grocer the other day, and one of the big challenges they have is a lot of their people will not look someone in the eye. So when they're talking to their customers, they won't look at them. And so we want to kind of think through all those things and think about what that means to that position. And if we'll do that, it'll allow us to better define that position and define the candidates that we're looking for. What we also want to do is look at what are the duties. So maybe they're going to stock shelves. Maybe they are going to operate a cash register. Whatever those are, we want to make sure that we outline those within the job description. We also want to list physical requirements. How many weight, what kind of weights do they have to lift? Do they have to stand for 8 hours? What are those? And we need to make sure that when we're hiring for a position, that we provide the job description to the applicant and have them sign it if we elect to hire them, to make sure that they state that they can perform those requirements and those duties. I'll give you an example. We had a client that they were looking for someone to stock the shelves, and someone came in and they were extremely obese, and it was pretty obvious that they would not be able to bend and lift and walk and those things for a day, for a 6-hour shift, which is kind of what they were working. But they hired them anyway. Well, they didn't have job descriptions. They never brought up the physical requirements. They never did any of those things. So then what they had was not only an issue where you had an employee that it became a health risk because they did have some health issues while they were trying to perform these duties, but also you didn't have a way to really to separate, because they had never, or it made the separation much harder because they had never gone through the physical requirements. So that's a very big thing as well, is to make sure those are within that job description. Also with the job descriptions, you can use them. We use them a lot when we're fighting unemployment claims, EEO suits, those kinds of things. It's also, it's really the foundation from an employee management perspective. And it's also, and it will grow, and we'll show you in a minute how it will also work into an incentive program. So that job description that's really the basis for everything. And if you don't have them, I suggest you get them. And go ahead and set those up, because it really does help, and we'll walk through how all this kind of lays together, but it really will help you as you're filling positions and also managing those positions. Another thing is that as we're bringing these candidates in, so we've got our job description and now we're trying to hire for that position. One thing that's very helpful are interview questionnaires, because these interview questionnaires, they really provide that hiring manager with questions that tie back directly to the job. And that's important, specifically for inexperienced hiring managers, because a lot of times they don't know how to interview. And so a lot of times what will happen is they don't ask questions that relate to the position. They end up talking about other things, maybe more social aspects than actually job-related aspects. So it's very important. We also want to make sure we have these questionnaires that are for each position. So for instance, if you are working with, if you're going to hire a cashier, those questions will probably be very different than if you're hiring a stocker. And so you want to make sure that they are set up for each position. Again, we also need to make sure they are aligned with the job description, because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but what's going to happen is with that job description, we want to ask questions that relate to that or align with that job description, because that's what the employee is going to be held responsible for. So we've got to make sure that we ask the right questions to get the right information to understand if the employee has the ability to perform those duties. It also, what it will do is these questionnaires make sure that the hiring managers are asking questions that are relevant to the position. A lot of times what we find, again, is they're asking questions that relate to maybe a social aspect, because that's easier to talk about. And so these questionnaires really help those managers hone in and ask those questions related. Also, what it will do is we hear all the time about supervisors that are asking questions they shouldn't. How many children do you have? Where do you go to church? I noticed you walked in with a limp. What's wrong? Is your back okay? This job is lifting a lot. A lot of those questions, and a lot of these supervisors don't know better than to ask those questions. What we found is a lot of times when employees are promoted, they're not promoted because they are good people managers. They're promoted because they're very good at their job operationally, and they have that aptitude of they can take on that job at a higher level, and they can manage those individuals, but we tend to train them more on the operational aspect than the people aspect. And so it's really important to train these supervisors to make sure that they understand how to interview. We want to make sure that they get to know the candidate, to make sure that they're a good fit for the company culture. It's very important to make sure that we're hiring people that fit into the culture of the store. They have that personality, that temperament. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to be the same. Everybody doesn't have to be a clone of each other. But we want to make sure that everybody kind of fits in that culture, because if we don't, that's going to lead straight to that turnover problem again, because they're either going to be ostracized or they are going to be not happy because their idea of the way the culture should work and the way they should interact is very different than what from what the company's is. They're going to get frustrated and they're going to leave. So we want to make sure again that they're a good fit culturally. A lot of times for me, for instance, when I'm hiring individuals, if I have an A candidate and a B plus candidate, and I know that that B plus candidate will fit in better with our culture, with the client service environment that we try to build, then I would pick that B plus candidate over an A if I know that they just don't fit. Their personality just doesn't fit within our organization, and to make sure that they have that same client, make sure that they work with that client the same way that we do. Also, we want to make sure that they're asking relevant questions, because we want to make sure again that they're relevant to the job, they're relevant to the position, and that they follow those job description requirements when they're asking those questions. We want to make sure they hire the best qualified. Now, obviously, we talked a little bit about culture, but we want to make sure that this isn't a popularity contest, because as you know, when it comes to hiring employees, there's always something political, or can be. Somebody knows someone, somebody's related to someone, those kind of things. But as best we can, we always want to make sure that we hire the most qualified. A lot of times that we find, specifically with more inexperienced managers and supervisors, is they get in those interviews, they don't ask questions about the job, they ask questions that are more socially oriented, and that's what they base their decisions upon. And we want to make sure that they are asking those questions, and when they're making their decisions, they're basing them on the culture, and also the culture of the company, and also to make sure that they can perform the duties that are required of that job. Now, from an employee screening perspective, we want to make sure that the applicants meet our requirements as a company. We know, and I know, that in your industry, it may not be economically feasible to employee screen everybody because of the turn that you have. But it's very important that you know who you are hiring, and you need to make sure that you understand as a company what's your view of criminal convictions and drug abuse or drug use. A lot of times, I've spoken with business owners, and when we were talking about employee screening, and they didn't care, and their response is, I don't care if they smoke weed. So if they're not smoking it at work, I don't care. And that's okay. And if that's your company's take, then a drug program is probably not for you. But what I would say is a couple things. One, what we do know is that drug use is at a 12-year high, and that's typically driven by 3 drugs. It's going to be driven by cocaine, marijuana, and methamphetamines. So we know that drug use is up. We also know that for us, as we, based upon the background checks that we run over the course of the last year or so, and we run thousands of those a year, that our criminal hit rate's about 15%. So about 15% of the employees that are hired are going to have a criminal background. Now, does that mean you can't hire them? No. What that does mean, though, is especially in a retail environment where you're working with customers, you want to make sure that you know who you're hiring. And so, because what you don't want to do is hire someone that has a criminal past, that may be a sex offender or something like that. They're in a break room with another employee and something happens. You don't want to have someone that has a criminal past that steals from a customer. Those kinds of things, because if you do, and it's proven that you didn't have the proper screenings, or you put those employees at risk because you didn't do that, then you're at risk. So, make sure you understand from a company perspective what your view of that is, and then you can build a screening program around it. As I said, just because they have a criminal conviction doesn't mean you can't hire them. But what it does do is it gives you the knowledge of what that conviction was, and then you can make a determination if they fit within your store. Also, one thing that I will say as well is a lot of times these employee screening programs can help you get better applicants. Better applicants are better hires, which can also reduce that turnover. I'll give you an example. We worked with a KFC franchise, and they had, I believe it was 20 KFC restaurants, and they had and in this particular reason, the reason they were doing it was because they had really bad workers' comp. And so the workers' comp broker got with us and asked us to meet with them, and we met with them and went through a drug program, and they did it, and they did it for a couple of reasons. One, their workers' comp carrier was requesting it, so they were a little reluctant to do it. Also, what happens is they got a discount on their workers' comp premium, so they had that money to offset the program cost. But they were extremely nervous that that program, they were going to have all their employees leave when they put it into place. What they did was we suggested that they give them 60 days, tell everybody this program's going into place 60 days, and at that point we are going to drug test for random as well as post-accident. Well, the long and short of this is they were very nervous. They were scared all their people were going to leave. It ended up they had, I think, 2 employees out of, I think they had 400 or 500. Out of 400 or 500 employees that actually left because of the drug testing program. And then what they found was not only did their workers' comp go way down, but also what happened was they said once they put that drug testing, that we are a drug-free workplace sign up, they started getting better applicants, because a lot of the guys, or a lot of the potential employees that had drug issues just didn't come in and apply. So it can help in that aspect as well. Again, one thing, develop a policy that meets your expectations. Determine how in depth you would want to go with a background check. Determine what you want to drug screen for if you decide to drug screen. And then also, if you decide to do that, make sure that you utilize a reputable company. All background checks are not the same. One thing that I would say is I didn't know this until I got in the business, is that most of your background checks are done through databases. And my assumption was that there's just this big database out there, and that's what everybody, when they ran a background check, regardless of who you got it from, they just went to that one database and they ran the background check and got the results. Well, that's not true. The databases are, most of them are proprietary, and so many of them are, so there are different qualities of databases out there that these different companies have. And so when you do that, ask a lot of questions about where they get their information, how they get their information, to make sure that the databases and what they're doing provides you the best coverage. Because you can always see companies out there that have, run all the background checks you want for $20. Well, more than likely their database isn't very good because they're not spending a lot of money maintaining it. So make sure you're using a reputable company, get references and those kind of things if you can get those from them. So we've hired our employees, we've got our job description, we've hired our employees, we've screened them if we want to screen them, and so now what do we do? So theoretically, we've got a good employee that meets our requirements for our job description. One thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we keep them engaged. And employee engagement is the extent to which employees feel passionate about their jobs, are committed to the organization, and put discretionary effort into their work. And so basically what this is we want to make sure that they care. And we want to make sure that they'll put in that extra effort if needed. ADP did a study, and what that study found that of 23% of the larger mid-sized businesses, which are from roughly 151 to 999 employees, the biggest reason that they had a decline in growth was disengaged employees. Their employees didn't care. They weren't engaged. They weren't going to do the extra effort, and that's why they had a decline in growth. Because at the end of the day, the person that makes the most contact, it's not that person sitting in the office. It's that person that's out on the floor dealing with the customers, and so they're the ones that have to be engaged. So one way to get those employees engaged is through a performance management program. We'll talk about what it is in a minute, but why does it matter? One thing is Aberdeen Research Group did a research project on this, and they found that those that have a performance management program, they have 64% greater employee engagement. Okay. Now, what does that lead to? It leads to 26% greater company revenue, and the reason for that is you have 5.3 times greater improvement in first contact resolution rates. So when somebody comes up and they ask what aisle a product is on, they get an answer. They don't get somebody that says, I don't know, ask someone else. I walked into a big box this past weekend. I was taking back a sheet of plywood. I walked into the return area. It was a big sheet of plywood, obviously. So I asked her, I said, how can I help? Where can I put this to where it kind of stays out of your way? Because I know they would have somebody that would come and take it back and put it on the shelf. And the answer was over in lumber. So basically what she said was it would be easier for her if I just put it back on the shelf. So obviously she's not engaged, and that's not a great response to a client or a customer. But what those first contact resolution rates also do is they lead to better customer referrals. If your employees are engaged, you have 3.3 times greater improvement in revenue from customer referrals. So you're taking care of your customers, they're going to come back, and then they're telling other people about your store. So there are great programs to do that. Basically, and this isn't rocket science, it's very simple. So we have our job descriptions. We talked about those. Those are going to let us hire the right employees. They're also going to let us or allow us to tell those employees through those job descriptions what our expectations are. What are they required to do, or what are we asking them to do? But then also what we're going to do is we're going to measure their performance, and we're going to reward that performance. Now, the underlying component of this, just like everything, the foundation is communication. Through this whole process is talking with the employees, it's communicating with them, and it's listening to them. So one of the best ways to do that is as we're measuring them is we're going to do performance evaluations. Now, I know everybody's thinking these are those annual performance evaluations that everybody gets, and you go in and somebody fills it out, takes 30 minutes, they fill it out, you have a meeting with them, you have a meeting with your supervisor, they give you the evaluation, and it's done for another 12 months. That's not what we're talking about. So basically what we want to do is we want to take those job descriptions, and we're going to take those duties and those expectations, and we're going to build our performance evaluation from that job description. And so what we're doing again is what we told them we were going to ask them to do in the interview with the job description, that's what we're going to grade them on. And we're going to talk about clear and measurable agreed upon objectives. So I'll give you an example. When we had some sales at a prior company, we had some salesmen, and we want to make sure that they knew what they had to do, and we wanted to make sure, and we'll talk about rewards in a minute, but we wanted to make sure they knew what they had to do and then what that reward was for doing that. The problem was the commission calculation, nobody could figure it out. No salesman could figure out the commission statement, and we barely knew it, and we were the ones that had to calculate it because it was just so complicated. Well, how did that motivate that salesman if he didn't know how he could affect that? And so we need to have clear and measurable, agreed upon objectives that basically you could write down on the back of a napkin. And that way what I've always said, simpler is the better. So we want to make sure that everybody knows what they are and everybody understands them. We also, on our performance evaluations, they're ongoing. They're not just at year end. Now, that doesn't mean we have to sit down with our employees and fill out a form every week, every time we talk to them. What we do want to do is have communication with them regularly, whether that's weekly or bi-weekly, whatever that is, to make sure that they understand what they're doing well and what they're not doing so well. And for those things that they're not doing well, developing plans on how to make those better. And again, what we want to do is it's all about increasing that communication. And we want to discuss any issues that the employee may be having trouble with so that they can communicate to us. So if we're asking them to do something, there may be something that's keeping them from performing those objectives. And if there is, we can get that feedback from them. And we also want to make sure that we assess their performance against their goals. So basically, we're just making sure that and letting them know where they're falling short and where they're doing well. And I think it's important to note both of those things. Every evaluation can't be a beat down, and every evaluation can't be anything but a rah-rah session. And it really needs to include both. And then we want to reward that performance. And again, it's the chain. So what we've built the job description, we've built the performance evaluations from what we've told them when we provided them the job description. So we want to link that to the rewards and build a chain on how all that goes together. Again, like we said, we want to make sure that they're easy to understand because if they can't understand how they're calculated or how they affect those rewards, it doesn't mean anything to them, and it's not going to drive behavior. And that's what we're trying to do, is drive behavior. The other thing I would suggest is that you offer rewards throughout the year. An annual bonus, while it's great and everybody wants a bonus, does that really drive me in March to get my annual bonus in December? And so what I always suggest is offer these rewards throughout the year, and every reward doesn't have to be $5,000, right? It can be simple things. It could be maybe they get a lunch, or maybe they get a gift card somewhere, or something of that nature. And then also ask them what they want. I know we had at a company I was at, we developed an incentive program, and we thought it was pretty good. And what we did was, if the stores, we had about 40 retail stores, if every store that met their sales goal, we provided a bonus for the employees, and it was a few $100s a piece, something of that nature. But what we found, because our thoughts were everybody wants money. Well, what we found was we had one section of our we had stores from Texas to Florida, and we had a section in Louisiana, and what we found was it didn't work. That incentive didn't work, and we couldn't figure out why. And so we got on the phone and we called some of the district managers in that area, and we said, well, what's the issue? And basically they said money's not going to drive them. What they want is time. And so what we ended up doing was saying, if they met their requirements, that we would give them an extra half day off or a day off rather than a check. And what we found was that started really affecting performance, because that's what they wanted. That's what drove them. So it's important to understand what drives your people and what's going to make them want to work more and work harder. But it is important, I believe, that we do that throughout the year. Maybe there is a larger annual bonus, but there could be throughout the year smaller, maybe monthly or quarterly incentives as well. Now, one thing that we can do, we obviously have those performances, and we're talking performance related rewards, but also one thing I wanted to talk about is there's one of the big things that we found is employees view medical access to medical care as a large incentive, and it should be, right? Because that's something that a lot of employees don't have, especially if you're looking in industries such as independent grocers, restaurants, hotels, who all have a very similar demographic from a worker perspective. A lot of those part-time folks, they just don't have access to that. And there's actually a survey that PSC Technology did of about a little over 1,800 restaurant workers. And what they found is that 93% of their employees did not seek medical attention the last time they were ill. The reason for that was they didn't have access to medical care. So basically, they had employees that were working sick, or they had absenteeism that they had to then cover. 71% reported working while sick because they couldn't afford time off. Again, in that, if you think about that part-time employee that's making $9 an hour, you know, they're working 25 hours a week. If they're sick, they may not be able to take time off because they can't afford not to have that pay. That's a big issue, especially for like restaurants and grocers, because now you have sick individuals that are working around food, which can obviously lead to customers and other coworkers becoming sick. And 52% said that they would prefer a medical care benefit versus a 5% raise. And that's huge because, again, a lot of these individuals just don't have medical care. So one thing that's gotten very popular, or is beginning to get more popular in these industries, is telehealth. So a few things about telehealth. One, it's not insurance. Okay, it's access to a physician. So it's not, you're not going to get a copay or any of those things. Basically, it's going to provide that employee an avenue to call a doctor, to get a diagnosis, and to have a prescription written where they can go get that and help them, obviously, to overcome the sickness. It doesn't meet minimum essential coverage. So if you're an ACA, this isn't something that's going to all of a sudden alleviate you having to provide minimum essential coverage. This does not fall in that. But it obviously is much cheaper than insurance. Typically, what you're looking at from a telehealth perspective, depending on the number of employees, is somewhere between $10 or $15 per employee per month. If you're looking at insurance, you're looking at about $300 per employee per month, right? So from that aspect, it's much cheaper, but it is not insurance. Now, again, what this provides to you is it's going to provide that employee 24/7 access to a physician from anywhere via smartphone. It's going to give them access to prescription services, and it's also going to it helps them with those common conditions. And these are things that are about 80% of doctor visits: allergies, headaches, flu, strep throat, sore throat, infections, skin reactions. All those things that you kind of think about. If you have to get stitches, obviously you're not going to call the doctor. But what they will do is they'll go through these, for these types of illnesses, they can help diagnose it, and then they will call a prescription into their local pharmacy. Now, again, it's not insurance, so it's not as if they're going to have a copay on the pharmacy. But what these employees can do is they can get discount prescription services, which are pretty prevalent. And in those, it will greatly reduce their prescription cost. I'll give you an example. I have one. I have insurance, but I also have a prescription discount card. I keep both of them on file at my pharmacist. And what they will do is they will run both cards and let me know which one's cheaper, whether it's insurance or the discount card. And then whichever one's cheaper, that's what I do. And a lot of times the discount card is cheaper than the insurance. So there are ways to mitigate that cost for that prescription. Now, make sure you do your research when you're looking at a telehealth. Many of them require a copay, which basically means that that employee is going to have to pay the $30 or $40 to make that phone call to the physician. There are many of them that do not. So you'll want to make sure that you kind of differentiate those that do and do not to determine how you would want to move forward. The copay will reduce utilization. So my suggestion is if you have one that you can provide to your employee where they don't have to use that copay, it's much better. Also, you want to make sure that you do have a utilization plan in place so that if you offer this, that you want those employees to use it, because if they will use it, one, it's going to be a bigger value to them, and it may be something where they're going to think twice about leaving. Two, it's also going to, if they're using it, that means that again, it's a bigger value, and they're going to stay. They're going to stay longer. You also want to make sure that it's bilingual, because a lot of what we see a lot in the industry is obviously you would need that bilingual offering. So we think we believe this is something that can really help from a turnover perspective, particularly with those part-timers, and it's something to definitely take a look at. Because what it's going to do for the employee is it eases the burden of medical care. They can go to the doctor, which is going to reduce absenteeism, because now if they get the flu, instead of having to be out 5 days, maybe they're only out 2 or 3 because they can get care. We also want to, it also helps them to save expense, time, and hassle of seeing a doctor. Obviously, if they have no copay on a telehealth, they can call. It doesn't cost them anything other than the prescription. Also, one thing I wanted to mention before is typically with telehealth, that when I was stating that $10 to $15 per employee per month, that's not only the employee, but everybody that lives with the employee. Okay, so if their child gets sick, it will also help that child. So that way, that will also help with absenteeism, because hopefully that child will get well sooner. And this is also a benefit that they may not be getting down the street. So if they decide to go to another grocer or another company, they may think twice about it, because if they make $9 an hour and they're going to another location for $9.15 or $9.25, that's not going to provide them that access to a doctor, that could be a big reason on why they stay. Now, for the employer, there's several benefits. One is it's low cost. Again, we talk about $10 to $15 per employee per month versus $300 per employee only if it's true insurance. Now, obviously, insurance is a bigger benefit, but that's not something you're going to provide to your part-time employees. It's going to decrease lost time due to worker and dependent illnesses. It's also going to reduce turnover, as we said, because of that value, that perceived value if they're using it. And it can also give you better candidates, because think about this: if the word is out in your community that you're offering these part-time individuals or employees this benefit, this telehealth benefit, while your competitors are not, where do you think the better candidates are going to go? A lot of those are going to go to your store because you have that type of offering. So again, we really think that that's a great benefit to employees that can help keep them with you and help keep them from moving and reducing that turnover rate for you. So just in conclusion, what we've talked about today is, one, we want to make sure we hire the right people. When we get them, we got to keep them engaged. And you know your people better than we do. But if you have that basic structure of a performance management program, I think that can really help. Also, if you can provide them benefits such as this telehealth benefit, which is something that a lot of these part-time people don't have, it can greatly build value with them and have them staying with your company versus going somewhere else. And so another thing, so I think using those things will greatly impact and reduce your employee turnover. Also, one thing John wanted me to mention is about the Affordable Care Act. As you know, they've tried to overturn it. They have not been able to do that as of yet. They do have some different proposals out right now. Whether that gets enough traction to actually happen or not, I don't know. I know that they need to get it done by September 30th, so we should know within the next couple weeks if they're going to be able to do that. So I would, but as of today, nothing has been repealed, and we still have to do the 1095 and 1094 forms. So if you are an ALE, make sure that you're in preparation for doing that and going ahead and getting all your paperwork together to get ready for that reporting. Because until they repeal something, I guess we've kind of been down this road before. Until they repeal it, the law is in effect, and we're going to have to maintain that or stay within that. So I guess that's it. That's it for this. We can certainly take questions. One thing I did want to mention, if some different ways that we have, if you want to learn more about human resources and things that are out there, or upcoming laws or anything like that, we do have several ways to do that. You can get our newsletter, and all you have to do is text my HRC to 22828. They'll text you right back and ask for your email address, and you can sign up for that. We also do a monthly column with the Shelby Report. If you subscribe to it, it's a new one. It started within the last couple months on human resources and benefits, as well as we have a blog on our website that we post a lot of information there too. So you're obviously, all those are free. So if you're interested in that, you can certainly do that as well. Here's my contact information if you do have if you would like to reach out or have any additional questions. And thank you.
Bye-bye.